Hello and welcome to the AniMonday podcast. My name is Colin Hemphill.
And I'm Kayla Hemphill.
On our show, we roll the virtual dice each week and must watch a randomly selected anime title. This week, we have a special guest joining us remotely. Please welcome to the show, Michael Lauderdale.
Hi, everyone.
Woo!
All right, Michael, so we have invited you on the show because you had the misfortune of watching the show that we have rolled this week, which is called The Master of Ragnarok and Blesser of Einherjar. And how did you come across the show, and what was your experience with it in the very early on stages?
Well, so I tend to watch new shows that look like they might be interesting whenever they come out, like as the seasons begin. And this one I could watch during lunch, so I was like, sure. And yeah, my experience was basically that I would have it on in the background during lunch, and I eventually decided that it was not okay and not going to be part of my lunch ever again. And so whenever I agreed to be on this show, like, part of my brain must have understood that I would have to watch it again. When I was watching it again, I was like, this seems like I've made several mistakes.
We appreciate your sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. I hope that makes me feel better.
So this show began as a light novel series in 2013. It was later adapted into a manga and then into a 12-episode anime series that actually premiered this July in 2018. And as far as we know, there are no plans for further episodes. Kayla, you want to give us a synopsis of the plot?
Sure thing. In the land of Yggdrasil, a never-ending war between nations has all but demolished the Wolf Clan. In an attempt to save her clan, a young woman named Felicia summons a modern high school student named Yuto, hoping that his insight and leadership could give them a chance at survival. Because of his access to modern research and history texts, Yuto is able to provide the Wolf Clan with strategy and technology that will turn the tides of war in their favor.
All right, so kind of the conceit of the show is that this kid ends up in some undisclosed past. They kind of talk about where he thinks the general dates are, and it's some kind of like Bronze Age technology.
Mm-hmm.
And he's ended up in this kind of pseudo-Norse mythology world, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, but none of it's really coherent in terms of the world building and their usage of Norse mythology kind of stuff. He is, for some reason, chosen to lead an entire clan called the Wolf Clan. And what do you think of that clan? Do you have any general thoughts on the way their society structures and how all that works?
I mean, honestly, the way they've set it up, they could have said he was part of anything with the amount of care that they pay to it later. Like he's part of the Wolf Clan, and that only matters insofar as like one of the characters has like wolf traits. Like, but it's not like it seems like they used it because they wanted to use the 12 signs of the zodiac or something for each of the clans. That's sort of the impression I get. And like, that's fine and all.
Sure.
But like, nothing in the show really holds up to scrutiny. Like, he says that he knows he's on Earth because the stars haven't changed. But he also says that the show is set somewhere between 2000 and 1000 BC. 3,000 years ago, the stars did not look the same.
That's
they move.
That's exactly what I told Colin when he said that. I was like, well, then you're wrong. Like, you don't know the star. And how do you know the stars so well? Like, as a high school student, I didn't know the stars that well to be able to pinpoint exactly where they were in a totally different part of the world, even.
Yeah.
They would look different on a different, he wasn't still in Japan. He was.
Right.
Which,
speaking of, how are they all speaking the same language?
They actually don't explain that.
No, they just said
actually
he didn't know it.
open that up as like a plot hole. Sorry,
Oh, really?
Kayla, what were you saying?
Yeah. Oh, I was saying that they actually say at one point that like Felicia had helped him when he didn't know the language.
Okay.
Right.
So they again, it's kind of that throwaway line of like, oh,
so they're all speaking common, in other words.
Yes.
Yeah. They hand wave a lot of stuff in this show. I mean, like, I don't know. Just looking at my notes, it's hard to know where to start.
Yeah, right.
I mean, maybe I almost feel like since we're probably just going to be ragging on this show for a bit, that we should start with the things that we thought were positive and then come back to describing anything about the show. Because
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
So of characters and story, what kinds of aspects of it do you, Kayla, and Michael find interesting or appealing?
I'm gonna. It's gonna be like a half.
Okay.
Like half positive, half negative. This kind of felt the same way that Monster Musume felt for me. Is that there was a lot of potential of world building here that could have been very, very interesting. Like they keep teasing at this idea that because he's bringing all this technology and knowledge into this past world, he is changing everything. He's changing the economy. He's changing how wars are being fought. Everything about that is being changed. And that could be really interesting if they took some time to explore that, like actually dug into some of the darker aspects, like how would it affect this, teenage kid that he's suddenly, a general of an army and he's having to kill people? Or like, how does this affect the world at large that he suddenly introduced paper to the world?
Yeah.
Like, these are really big things that revolutionized the world when they came into play, and he's introducing them at the wrong time. And it could have been very interesting to see how that was playing out, especially since he still had, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, he still had connection to the present, the future. He could still talk with somebody from his own time. So did it just not affect the world at all? It could have been very interesting, and they just, blew past it because harem. That's why.
yeah, sort of building on that, like, I have a point here where I wrote that, like, the thing I liked most about this show was that he does all these things, and when, like, for example, at the start of the show, well, not the very start, we'll come back to that in a bit, but like after the intro rolls, and we'll talk about that too, there's this scene where there's two armies battling, and his army is in phalanx formations, and they're using iron weapons. And like conceptually, if you think about what it would mean for Bronze Age soldiers using bronze weapons and leather gear to fight against an army outfit with like iron weapons who are in a phalanx formation, like it's actually sort of genuinely interesting. Like it's an interesting idea, especially since this genre, and we talked about this a little bit before this started, but this genre is, like the isekai genre, is replete with characters that show up and are just overpowered. And if he was overpowered merely because he was knowledgeable, that actually would have been genuinely innovative for this style of show.
Yeah, that would have been really cool.
Yeah, but that's not what they do. Like, almost immediately after you're able to comprehend that he has iron weapons and phalanxes and he's doing all this stuff that's only a step or two above, not like time-wise, but in terms of overall tactics of the era that he's supposedly in, you find out that, like, the woman he's been talking to, like, this whole time has straight up magical powers and just invalidate an entire hail of arrows from people shooting at him from what is actually a ludicrous distance for Bronze Age. And like at that point you're like, well, what does the iron and the phalanx even matter? There's people who could kill literally everyone on the field by themselves.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point? And I get that, like, what becomes his eventual collection of superpowered women, which is gross. Like, what happens with that? That's supposed to be an outlier because he's a special boy.
Yeah.
And then, like, there's an OP villain who shows up, and I didn't watch the 5th episode to find out what happens with that because I don't care. But, like, I get that they're supposed to be outliers, but wouldn't it make sense if the fact that people with superpowers existing means that, like, you don't have to have wars the same way? Like, the whole interaction and hierarchy of society would probably change around that, like it does in My Hero Academia, for instance.
Yeah.
And there's no reflection on that on the part of the show. like, if you just don't think about what's happening in this show, it's possible you could enjoy it, but it's still real hard, right? Like, the
Yeah.
characters are super flat. They have real limited detail. Like, I wrote that the only reason you have to care about any of them is that if, like, any of the major characters die, genocide ensues. And, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I got this vibe from the show that you get it when you read, like, fan fiction or, like, whenever you yourself first attempt to write something and you, like, look through it with a critical eye and you're like, this just seems like all the characters are one person and they're just executing a scenario. Similar thing happens if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons and you have, like, an inexperienced DM and inexperienced players. And so they don't craft a story together. They just do things. There's no, like, plot or anything. Like I felt like the actual plot for this show, the real conflict that they've set up that's consistent is that he's in a time that's not his own and he wants to return back to what I guess is his childhood girlfriend or something.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you realize that's the real underlying conflict of the show, and then you watch what happens, you're like, why is he doing any of this? Why did he get so involved?
Yeah.
Yeah, to the point that he says, like, he's willing to burn down entire villages and slaughter thousands of people if these people won't swear fealty to him.
Yeah.
Right. Although they try to, like, pull that one back.
Sure.
By pretending that he's not really going to do
Oh,
that.
I was just bluffing.
But, like...
No, but really, be my sister.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We haven't talked... Let's talk about the initial first episode.
Okay.
Just so people can get a sense of, like, what it is we're complaining about. So, I think the very first scene, like, sort of sets the tone for the whole show. Like... And I'll describe it so it sounds good. All right. So the show starts with a cold open. You see the silhouette of a naked woman in some body of water, and above her are the stars. And then it cuts to our main character. He's sitting on a log or a small chair, and he's looking at his smartphone. And on it, you can see that it's talking about, like, phalanxes in English, I think. Which...
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure, why not? Let's say he's really good at English. Let's go with that. And there's some conversation that he has with the woman when she walks out of the lake, and it's mostly throwaway stuff. You immediately get the impression that, like, you're supposed to think this guy is sort of cool, but it's the sort of cool that actually isn't cool. Like, this is like when people make up fanfics about themselves.
Yep.
sort of thing. And that's, like, solid, the tone of the whole show. And then after that scene ends, she was asking him why he was ignoring her, basically. And he was like, oh, I was doing some research. And it's like, okay, for what? Because they haven't told you. You don't really know what's going on. This is your first introduction to this character. And, like, on balance, he just seems weird. And that cuts to the intro, and the intro is horribly animated to the point that it's kind of nauseating, like the way that they don't properly deal with perspective. And then, like, there's a portion of the intro where two characters are fighting, and it just looks like a mediocre mobile game, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And then after that, it immediately goes into the rest of the show, and you find out that he's conquering other peoples, and then they refer to them as patriarchs in the translation, forcing the patriarchs of those societies to swear fealty to him and either become his daughters or his little sisters, because they're all women at this point.
Yeah.
And so if you've watched a lot of anime, you're there and you're like, all right, so this feels like that show In Another World with My Smartphone, which was not a good show. Plus, there's, like, wildly more questionable elements, like this whole fealty thing, like the way that he just intentionally manipulates the first character from outside his group that he comes into contact with
Yep.
is super disgusting. And then it moves from that into just like lots of fan servicey stuff. So there's like so this is what we're dealing with, right? Like it's a poorly animated show. When the music turns on, it's like they're trying to tell you how to feel rather than augmenting how you feel. And like the interactions are real questionable on a lot of levels, and they don't seem to serve any purpose, especially once you realize that the plot is he going back to his home world. And so that's the show.
Yeah, I'd say that does it.
Yeah.
Like the problem is there's not really a story.
Sure.
So I mean, you guys looked at Line Barrels of Iron, which I vaguely remember having watched parts of and then dropped. But even that, like, that has a story, and it definitely has like a conflict, even if it's forced, right?
Yeah.
It's like, is this person gonna continue being a big bad? Find out next time. And you're like, I don't care though.
Sure.
Yeah, there are a few specific things I want to kind of touch on. One is the way that they handle technology in this show is completely whack and doesn't make any sense.
Do tell.
So basically, he has this one childhood friend that you alluded to earlier who he can still communicate with in this world, but he has to be in a certain location, like near this mirror that was the gateway to this world. And so as long as he's in proximity to that, he can make phone calls and he can talk to this person.
With his literal cell phone.
Yeah, with his phone.
Also, his phone never runs out of battery, or even... That's never even brought up.
It is. His phone is solar-powered.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Which, that's not a thing.
But if it was, it would be pretty cool.
Yeah, but like the idea that this thing that doesn't exist or is extremely niche and rare, he just happens to have one, and that's how they get around the plot hole that there's no electricity in this world he's in.
He still doesn't have cell service, though. That still doesn't explain his ability to...
So, yeah, he can...
Cell service.
He has to be in proximity to make contact with this girl, but he can just look up things on the internet anywhere.
Sure.
He doesn't have to be any particular place. He can be on the battlefield. He can be in his palace thing, and he can just access the internet.
Colin, don't you know that the internet has just always existed and we've just only recently harnessed its power from the earth?
Yeah.
That does sound like some real New Age style stuff. I can totally see the internet as part of the infinite energy of the universe, and it's come into existence by us harnessing our inner way, whatever.
Sure. I have one also plot hole thing that I want to discuss, which is why are children in charge? There are adults everywhere.
Yeah.
And yet it's consistent that the teenagers are the patriarchs of all these different clans. So our main character is a teenager. He becomes the patriarch. We get introduced to another teenage girl that ends up swearing loyalty to him, and she's a teenager. His arch nemesis is a teenager. Why? Especially since they say heredity isn't a reason to become a leader.
Right. So I guess the idea here is that these teenagers are the most strategic and the most intelligent of all the people.
So it's Ender's Game.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, pretty much.
Except without like the selection part.
Right.
A very large population.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's unbelievable. Like there's so much in this show that just it's a lot more difficult to make sense of. But if you're even like mildly cynical about the way the show's been put together, you're there and you're like, oh, they played anime trope bingo. They're like, so we're going to make an isekai anime. Those are popular right now. We're going to make a harem so that way we don't have to deal with a story or having any actual events of real import. Let's have some magical girls. Not like magical girls. They'll be like, it'll be special because they'll just be real strong. But let's have the main villain be a man. in the translation, let's have everyone referred to as a patriarch. I did want to point this out. I noticed at one point that they translated Onisama into patriarch, and I was just like, what? What? Like, it's almost immediately. Like, it's in the part where they're browbeating that girl after they've, like, are threatening to either enslave her entire society or kill all of them. And at one point, they're saying that she's being a little too rude, considering her position here. And when they refer to him, you hear them say Onisama, but then they just translate it as patriarch. And I kind of feel like that's Crunchyroll telling you that they don't care either. This is horrible.
Yeah.
Like, so many parts of this show just feel like it. For example, he's in what appears to be a palace, but you get outside shots of it sometimes, and it appears to be a ziggurat, right? And like, it's not clear that he's inhabiting it or if it was already there.
Sure.
But if you know anything about those kinds of structures, you know they take decades or over a century to build. Like, they don't just show up. And like, there's only a couple of them, really, and they're effectively wonders of the world. And so they just put them in there, and they give it. They don't mention it at all. Like, it's not special. They act like that's totally normal.
Yeah.
But if they had given you any real information, you could have actually gone and been like, where are they? Because it appears they're in South America. And then, he talks about it being Bronze Age.
Yeah.
But then he talks about, like, Norse legends and stuff.
Yep.
And maybe my history isn't the best, but I was under the impression they had iron weapons, like, the whole time.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, the timelines are completely off throughout the whole show.
Which would be fine if they just chalked it up to, like, he's a teenager and doesn't really know. Like, I guess that was my frustration with this is when he's, like, doing some of the narration and explaining, like, this is how I know what part of the world that I'm in. It's like, how?
Oh,
like, you're not an expert in what these, like, artifacts look like. You're a high school student.
It's because his phone has internet, but it doesn't have GPS.
Oh, my gosh.
Listen, what he did was he downloaded Google Sky, and then he pointed it up at the sky, and he was like, I'm still on Earth. I mean, like, other things that are just kind of thrown in there, like, so there's a lot of European language usage.
Yeah.
Like, there was some point, I'm trying to remember what, like, I remember them saying Sieg something, and I remember thinking at that point that, like, do they know how that, like, comes off? Do they understand the cultural implications of a bunch of people, like, arm raising and being like, Sieg ruler? That's not, like, whew. And, like, the European languages are just decoration, like the ziggurat and everything else, practically.
So, Michael, you had said that basically all of the characters can kind of be lumped into one giant character, and they don't really have any discernible characteristics or qualities.
Right.
But I do want to point out a couple specifics that are worth mentioning. The biggest one to me is Christina and Albertina.
Oh my gosh.
Which are two twins. They come from one of the other clans, I think the Claw clan.
Yeah.
They're probably by far the youngest looking people in this show. Even the other characters who appear to be like older teenagers comment on, hey, why are there kids here? And yet they're easily the most sexualized of all the characters.
Immediately.
Oh, yeah, that's how they're introduced.
Yeah. One of them is, your typical airhead character with the big ahoge. And the other is incredibly bossy and manipulative to her sister.
Abusive. Abusive is the word you're looking for.
Abusive, sure. They were something. I can't... Their inclusion, especially 3 episodes in, was pretty rough.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's... I had commented to Colin as we were watching this, especially, so the younger sister is Christina, and she is constantly tearing her sister down, to the point it's this very, like, narcissistic, codependent relationship between the two of them. So Christina is constantly tearing her sister down. Her other sister is constantly looking for approval. And our first introductions, they're kind of like hiding out in this back alleyway sort of thing. And then Christina like pretends to be sick or something and pulls her sister on top of her. And so they're like laying on the ground, and it has all these weird shots, you know.
Let's describe those for a second, because I don't think our viewers will understand what we say when we mean weird shots. So there's like in just broadly speaking, there's a big problem with male gaze style shots in anime. They do sometimes temper it by actually doing effectively the same thing to men, but like, you know, it's sort of like, well, how's that supposed to make it better? But anyway, so you have these two characters who are maybe 7 or 8, it looks like.
Yeah.
And I referred to this in my notes as the non-consensual lowly cold scene. Because what's happening is one of the characters has like pinned the other to the ground. And she's like, well, since I have a cold, the easiest way to get rid of it is to give it to someone else. And it's like, well, that sounds like a lie that you made up right now. And then she starts like breathing and like doing like, it's sort of implied that she's doing some weird stuff to her sister. And while it's implying that, it's giving you all these thigh shots and like shots from like where like, because she's on all fours, so they're giving you like basically Kama Sutra shots, like at different angles, except the characters are clothed and are also both little girls.
Yeah.
Like I don't know who can watch that and not feel uncomfortable.
No, it was definitely cringeworthy for sure.
I mean, it almost like I feel like it went past cringe, like almost like the cringe part's when she pins her to the ground. But when the scene just keeps going, you're there and you're like, what is wrong with the people who made this? Like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to get out of this. Like, I get the impression that it's supposed to be like haha funny, but like most of the jokes in this show either are really forced or like you only realize they're jokes after the fact. Like the whole thing where she's just like bashing her sister the whole time. I think that's supposed to be a gag, but like it comes off as like an abusive relationship.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think this scene was supposed to be like, haha, look how much we're playing it up. Ah, ha, 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 ha. But then that's not what you get out of it, because like it just doesn't have the nuance to even begin to try to do that. And even if it did, it would just lower it down to cringy.
Yeah. And this is also part of that tropey thing that they added into, especially with the harem. This is like the twincest thing, which is really awkward and uncomfortable. It's not something I fully understand, but I know it's common in harem genres to have a set of twins that are sexual with each other. It's weird.
Yeah, especially when one of them is not all there and seems to be able to not function in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah.
The other joke that I remembered being weird, kind of like this, was there's a scene like immediately after, like it's in the first episode, where one of the characters has won a battle, and she's talking to her patriarch, I guess, main character, and he's there, and he's like, for winning this, I'll give you anything you want. And she's like, anything. And you're like, oh, whoa, what's she going to ask for? I'm not down for this. And she's like, well, can you pat my head? And you're like, what? And he's like, are you sure that's all you want? And then it shows like a picture of her with like, I took a picture of the wolf in the background from this. Let me see if I can find it. Like, the art in this show is bad. It's just bad. And, like, let me see if I can send this to Colin and Kayla. Jesus. So here it is. Here's what we're dealing with. I don't know if you guys can see that yet or not.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
All right. So it shows this, and it's just like, what? And then it cuts to like the head patting scene, and you're there, and you're like, this is like it's not uncommon for head pats to occur in Japanese anime.
Mm-hmm.
And like typically the way they play it off is that one person's doing it sort of offhandedly as like a sort of affection, and the other character's a little more affected by it than that.
Mm-hmm.
But this has like strong sexual undertones, so it's just really weird, like immediately.
It's also immediately after that scene, one of the other characters comments like, "Oh, you're just like a loyal dog to him."
Yeah.
Yeah,
which,
that wasn't okay.
No, it outlines the whole like, oh, they're part of a wolf clan and he's the leader, and they're all like loyal dogs to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's so bizarre, like that this show happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, so all the jokes are kind of like that. And so you don't, like, I think there's intended to be humor to break up the weirdness of the show, but it doesn't work. And, like, I guess we should get back to some of the things that I liked about the show. All right, so one of the few things that I did kind of have to give it props for was that, as far as I can tell, aside from having a smartphone that works in, like, 2000 BC, character doesn't have superpowers. I mean, he could later, but we didn't see those episodes. So, give him the benefit of the doubt. He's just a normal dude.
Yeah.
This does make some of the other scenes make less sense, but you know, he doesn't have superpowers, and that's actually kind of nice because typically in these shows, like let's compare. I don't remember the Japanese name of the show, but In Another World with My Smartphone is about a character who I think he dies. And then God's like, well, that sucks. Let me put you in some other world, and you can keep your smartphone, and I'll give you really good stats. And it's like, well, that's bizarre. And so he goes into the other world, and he's just overpowered. Like, he's able to learn multiple kinds of magic, and that's special because they tell you it is. And that's what this show kind of reminds me of, except that it's less fast and loose with that part of the show, even though that's like the primary conceit of In Another World in My Smartphone is that. And so the fact that they played fast and loose with it was basically just you being like, well, I guess I don't care. And like I kind of liked how it opens into where the main character's been in the past for a while and he's already accomplished some things. So you don't have to like sit through a bunch of stuff that's probably not interesting. And, you know, they can flash back so you can see him being introduced to these other characters and they can build the characters that way when it's relevant. But while I liked that, I don't think that's what they were doing. Like, I get the impression that they skipped those parts either because they don't exist in the manga or the light novel or because they're real bad.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at the animation quality, character designs, art style, music, all the production sorts of elements. I do want to point out the one positive that I kind of took away from the animation of this show. If you've ever watched anything where there are large-scale battles happening, those scenes are kind of notorious these days for being just cheap CG, getting a large number of people on a battlefield and having it look cohesive and fluid is difficult for sure. So they actually took some shortcuts here in these big battle sequences that helped them to avoid those, and it actually allowed them to keep the same style and animation quality throughout the whole show. So rather than these really jarring scenes of big scale CG people moving like robots, you would actually see like freeze frames or they would zoom in on small sections of the battle so that you had more of a focus. And the micro parts of the battles were animated in unison with the rest of the scenes. And then the kind of flyover shots to show you the big scale of the battles were done in shortcut kind of methods, but they were done in a way that didn't distract you from what was happening. So I do give them props for that. They didn't bite off more than they could chew, because I think that would have upset the balance a whole lot more than just using some cheaper techniques.
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, I would have to agree about the scales. For when it comes to the characters, We've kind of talked about this before. Something that can be kind of difficult when you have a lot of different characters that you're dealing with is running out of character designs. So characters end up looking the same. And other than the twins, who still look different from each other, you can still tell them apart. They have different color hair and they part their hair on opposite sides. And
one has a major ahoge.
Yes, and one has the ahoge. They did some weird animation with the girls during what I call the intimate scenes. So anytime you see them less clothed, I will say, they had weird blush marks, like on parts of your body that don't
blush.
That don't blush, like your shoulders. That was something I commented a lot, is that there was a scene with one of the girls who's throwing herself at the main character because, and you see like the top of her breasts and her cheeks are all blushed, and sure, I guess, but also her shoulders, like the tops of her shoulders are like really shiny and have that same sort of blush mark on them. And I was like, what, are her shoulders also embarrassed?
She's polished.
It is. It was really weird because that doesn't happen with any of the characters any other time. When you might see their shoulders or something like that, and they don't have that shiny glaze to them. But as soon as they get like in a more precarious situation, it's like she rubbed herself in oil before.
I mean, yeah, obviously.
Because that's what one does, I guess.
Yeah, there's blushes on everything. There's also sparkles everywhere.
Yes, lots of sparkles.
In the sky, over the entirety of the screen, on people's butts. Doesn't matter. There was a sparkle on it.
Oh, they do this. Actually, it looks kind of cool. They do this thing with the eyes where they sort of glint, I guess.
Yeah.
And that looked kind of neat.
Yeah, their eyes had like a very unique sort of drawing style to them. Like even the way that they did the irises, they all looked different.
And they all have different color eyes and the like. And honestly, I don't actually speak Japanese, but the way that the lines were sounding like they were being delivered sounded pretty much like most anime. So it seemed like they didn't really film that part in. The only part that really seemed a little odd was like they use, I think of them sort of stopgap techniques, but they're shortcuts basically, so that you can imply motion without having to animate an entire visual, or you only animate one part and you sort of slide along the part that's animating, stuff like that. But they use them so much that it's difficult to ignore that that's what they're doing. And then occasionally the quality of the animation like drops precipitously. Like there's I have some, I'll just describe them for the viewers. So the characters, their faces are relatively consistent, but occasionally they're just not. And it looks, it's so weird because like, I don't know, I'm looking at one right here and it kind of feels like, because the way that they make these, from what I understand, is that someone will, actually review the art before they put it into the show. But then you have like faces like these two that I sent you guys, where it looks like someone doodled these into like a notebook, and they're like, this is fine, and it doesn't really make much sense. Like
sure,
like there's parts where you're like, well, I can tell their budget can't be enormous, or they wouldn't be doing things the way that they're doing. But this is the sort of thing where they're there and you're like, this doesn't even look like the same character.
Yeah.
This doesn't look like it's from the same show. Just redo this cell because the character's not going to move, right?
I think the other thing that I noticed too, kind of in the same line, is they, other than in these couple of scenes where they do make some shortcuts, is the main characters, the teenagers, are all drawn and they look very childish. And you don't really think about it until you see the adults, which are almost drawn in a totally different style.
Sure.
They have way less detail to them, and they're more realistically proportioned. And so when you see the kids, it kind of accentuates how much they look like children versus like all these adults that are around all the time.
Yeah.
They're constantly surrounded by adults. They're on their war councils. they're everywhere. They work for the kids. It's a weird dynamic, but you can see that animation difference between the main characters and the people that they constantly interact with.
It's almost like they gave the animators a job of, okay, you just draw these background characters. They're normal-looking adults. And they were like, oh, cool, I know how to draw a person.
Yes.
And then they handed them the main characters and the designs for all these other people, and we're like, oh, I got to draw a different girl now?
Yeah, the style is... It's that was probably the most jarring part for me. Is usually we've talked before about like when we've switched from like CGI to the animation, this was still animated and yet it felt like it didn't belong at all.
Yeah, Michael, when you mention like these individual frames where you can tell that there's just not a good cleanup on the faces or anything like that, it makes me wonder, like, we're getting supposedly the Blu-ray kind of release here. What we would see on Crunchyroll is probably a little bit cleaned up.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is like the aired version,
I think
but you do see this occasionally. Like Kotaku will have articles of, "Hey, this running anime, look at this frame, this is great," and then they show it later after it's been released on Blu-ray, and all that stuff is kind of cleaned up. Yeah. So I wonder where in the process that is too.
Sure.
I mean, like with this show, I'd be really surprised if... I mean, I guess they would still make Blu-rays, because in Japan, when they sell Blu-rays, they don't sell them for, like, acceptable prices from American consumers'
Aniplex of America prices.
Yeah.
Like, you look at them, and it's like, how much is the Blu-ray for this series? And there's like, well, you can get the first 4 episodes for $45. And you're like,
I need 3 of these?
Yeah, you're like, what else do I get? And they're like, what do you mean? It comes in a Blu-ray case and there's art. Wow. And it's just so bizarre.
Yeah.
And while we're sort of talking about the aesthetic of the show, like the music is real. Like I remember it's either like not really noticeable, you're like just okay, or during the scenes where they're trying to show you that this is a funny scene, they play this dopey music.
Yeah.
And it's like the person who mixed the music in didn't get to see the scene. They were just told when it was going to be, and they're like, yeah, play the dopey music from 11:20 to 13:35. Make sure it loops right. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. I mean, that's easy. Do you need me to like do anything, like use different... No. Just
don't spend more than 3 minutes on it.
Yeah, we don't
I need a print in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, we don't have the money to pay you to actually do anything aside from just put the music in, you know. And the recorded vocals in the music in the intro and outro sound real weird.
Yep.
Like I think I wrote something like, it sounds like the vocals were recorded on the voice actors' phones or something. And then they were just like, yeah, this is good enough. This is fine.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah, this was another area that I really felt they could have done something and made the show more interesting. For instance, they could have had like cultural or era appropriate music.
Yeah.
So they could have done something in that region or from that time period or something. And that would have been really interesting. And that could have been really cool and really set this anime apart. But no, it's just generic.
Yeah.
Something or another music that I agree with Michael. I barely remember it at all.
When I think of this kind of, you know, they're throwing around all these Norse mythology terms. When I think of that stuff, I want to hear like the recent God of War or Skyrim or something like that, where there's a very, it evokes this very Norse kind of, you just feel cold when you listen to it and you want to go drink some ale or some mead.
Also, were they in the desert?
I think that we can't draw any conclusions about where they are because it doesn't, like, it's
the
not
Northern
consistent
Hemisphere.
enough. I don't even know about that. I feel
I'm
like
not sure. Oh, did he? Oh,
he said, we're somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, but 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago even, the only places that really had cities were like South America, portions of the Middle East, and then like China and like Korea. And then there were
Yeah.
some places in Africa as well. But
Yeah.
like the only place that has any style of architecture that looks like what we see is on the other side of the world from where you would
Yeah.
expect these characters to be.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like all the background stuff is like Michael was saying, it's not from the region that we're pulling like the mythos from. So we keep talking about all these different mythos from like North mythology. That is hard to say. But the region, when you look at it, does not match that at all. In fact, like there was very few times when I saw trees. I was just thinking about that. I was like, they're in these huge open, what look like, it looks almost like desert. Yeah. And I was just thinking, I don't think anywhere in the Europe region looks like that at all.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into kind of closing out with our general thoughts and likes and dislikes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that really drove me crazy this whole time, because like for last episode when we rolled this show, I spent forever trying to figure out how do you pronounce this Norse thing.
Yeah, sure.
And I thought that's what I was going into, was some kind of cool Norse mythology thing. Because this is, 2017, 2018 are kind of the year for Norse mythology with God of War coming out and shows like this. And they had toyed with the new Assassin's Creed being Norse mythology.
Mm-hmm. And you were just playing a game like yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, also Norse.
Really
mm-hmm.
Yeah. To me, this seems like they realized that this was kind of a popular thing at the time.
Yeah.
And they needed some shortcuts on world building. And so they decided to pull these bits and pieces, mostly just vernacular, like, I'm going to take this name and this name and this name, throw them all in, and that's going to be my world. But I'm not actually going to do anything with it. Like, they mention Valhalla at one point when they're going to kill this guy, and there's nothing around it. It's all superfluous to the actual plot, the story, the characters, anything.
Yeah, they have a few throwaway lines that's supposed to be driving the plot. Like at one point, somebody is like, I think this guy is going to bring on Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. But they don't explain like what that means or why they think that. They're just like, I think this.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe they get into and try to bring more of the Norse part in, but it's all through like verbal dialogue. There's nothing about the feel of the show that makes you think, oh, this is like a show that centers around Norse mythology. If they took out all that dialogue, you would have no idea that this was about that at all.
No, not at all.
And while we're moving into our final thoughts, I do have to bring up the thing that I thought was like the most unacceptable thing that happens in this show.
Okay.
So in the third episode, the character is walking through a market with like one of the members of his harem, I guess, basically. And he hears someone who's hawking some good. And so he walks over, and it turns out the guy is selling a woman and her young daughter. And the character's like, oh no. And so the way the show like delivers this is he essentially buys this woman and her daughter because he's such a nice guy.
Of course.
Like in the context of the show and the position that he's in, like there ought to have been more reflection and introspection than that. Like slavery isn't something that you can throw in as a decoration. Yeah. Like, you probably should just leave it alone, in all honesty. It's not like what were they thinking? And then, like...
Yeah, it's like you've introduced this. You've now shown us that this is a world where slavery is happening and frequent and normalized.
Yep.
And in this character who cares so much about everything, instead is going to go collect his harem and... try to beat these other clans and just kind of throws this thing away.
Yeah, and that's my biggest problem with this show is that I actually think I see this a lot with, especially as we've been watching more and more of these shows that have this harem style theme to them, is they just get really lazy with their world building in order to focus on, the sexy time. And I feel like these shows could be done well in a way that, like, you could actually potentially enjoy a harem-themed show if if they actually spent any amount of time on the world and on the characters. Like, make me care about those things and balance that out. And these could actually be really good shows instead of just like, look at these girls' boobs. Aren't they great? And that makes me so frustrated with these shows because they take ideas that could be decent and they're just like, I'm just going to kind of throw this in front of you, but really we're focused on all the ladies. It's like, well, why are you even bothering with this stuff? Like, what does that matter?
Yeah, especially if they gave the girls a reason to like the main character.
Yeah.
Which none of these shows do, as far as I can tell.
Sure. Other than that, he's a nice guy.
Yeah.
I mean, even when they actually have like decent character interactions, the format of the shows tends to prevent them from actually being good anyway. Because like if the character, let's say the main character does choose one of this, like the women who are interested in him, well, most shows aren't going to be about polygamy, but they could have done that. But that's not what most shows would do. And that's not the way they style the romance in the shows either.
No.
So it's implied that if he does actually, basically act like a reasonably mature person and stop leading all of these people on, then the show's over.
Yeah.
And like what Kayla was saying about, there being interesting stuff in this show, this is genuinely why I watched like 3 episodes by myself. It's like I didn't roll into it and was like, oh, I guess I have to watch this. I was just watching it and like, the idea that he could use even like what would seem to us in modern days to be relatively minor advantages in technology and tactics. That's cool. The way that like parts of the show open, like the outcome of him using phalanxes and iron is immediately just like a brutal massacre.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it implies this sense of like brutal realism that they could have gone with, and instead they were like, it was like someone thought critically about like what would be an innovative way to craft an isekai genre anime, and they were like, yeah, I have this idea, and then someone was like, so we need some harem stuff, and there should be magic because people like that. And there's some Norse things going on, so do that. Ooh, could you have, like, really cool buildings? I like really cool buildings. Oh, there needs to be a rival, and he's going to be, like, better than everyone. So strong that he, like, basically teleports. And the main character is going to just, like, act like a jackass to him. And he's not just going to immediately die and end the show.
Yeah.
And like, when that part happens, by the way, this is like in the 3rd or 4th episode, he basically confronts like this villain. He's this red-haired, strong jock guy, and you see him in the intro, so you know that he's supposed to be important. But he has no motivation. He apparently just like fights people to fight people, which shows up in anime all the time, but like it like all it amounts to is you can't reason with him.
Right.
And in a show where the rest of the characters are coherent and deep, and this character is too, but you can't reason with him, that's an interesting character. In this show, like, he's basically a homicidal psychopath, and no one even blinks an eye. They're like, man, I wish he wasn't such a douche. I mean, I know he gonna fight us because he's strong and he likes Smash. And it's like, what in the, like, why? Like, it doesn't take much reflection on any of the things that they've included to realize that this, like, the base concepts they're working with aren't actually necessarily bad. I mean, I don't know that they can just stuff a harem anime into anything and have it actually work.
Sure.
I mean, they try to. You see it all the time. But
yeah, definitely.
Typically, that tends to be the weakest point of those shows at that point. And so, like, I don't know. It's so, like, I just can't understand, like, the only way this really makes sense is if someone at a marketing division somewhere was like, write this, and then it was mildly successful because it's, it's a focus group thing.
Sure.
And they were like, man, make a manga, and the manga sold okay. So they were like, all right, let's finish the end of this. Let's make the anime. And then they're like, we made the anime. And while you're watching the anime, it's just a bunch of scenarios, one after another, that if you just cut some of them out or moved them around, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I have a new show that I would like to pitch to you all.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so this kid, he ends up in this alternate universe place in the past. When he arrives, his phone is at 86%. He only has access to a downloaded copy of Wikipedia, which takes up his entire phone.
And like, it's an incredible phone.
Yeah. Subsets of Wikipedia, then. He was real into strategy.
Okay.
And war and stuff. And he can only look up things so long as his phone is still charged. So he must utilize his power when it is most appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean, similar to that, like, I thought of, if he's just like a really good student who had like a hobby of trying, like, because you've seen like the YouTube channels where people make like bricks and iron and stuff using methods that would have been primitive but were available back to people for all of time. Like, if he was just someone who had a hobby like that and then was sent back in time, he would be legitimately very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to deal with, because it's so lame. Like, he's there and there's these people talking to him with magical powers, and he's just like, yeah, that's cool, but like, I'm reading about phalanxes on my phone, so could you give me a minute? And it's like, what?
He constantly acknowledges how lame it is, too. He's always like, well, I'm cheating.
Yeah. He does do that a lot.
Like, he says it all the time.
I don't know, maybe for the target audience that's meant to inspire empathy, but every time he says it, I'm just like, dude, no one cares. Like, literally none of these people care that you're quote-unquote cheating because you're causing them to slaughter their enemies and bring glory to their tribes. Like, they don't care.
Nope.
Like, I'm not even sure that any of the other characters ever even acknowledge that he says that.
Yeah. No.
I can't recall. Like, they might, but like, it's not important to them. It's very plain they don't care.
Yeah.
No, they just want Future Man to bring all of his technology to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's nowhere near doing that.
No.
Right? Like, that's one of the things where, like, the fact that he's just, like, bringing them iron, even if it's a full-on, like, Carnegie-style ironworks, except that would be steel. But, like, even so, like, just the fact that he's, like, bringing the industrial era to ancient times to produce a metal that no one else has, that actually is genuinely disruptive, but also still believable. It's not like if he was like, here's how you make transistors. That would not fly, right?
No.
No.
All right, so every week we close out the show with the same question, and we'll start by asking you, Michael, would you watch more of this?
I hope to never have to see anything about the show again. So no.
Yeah, I agree too. I just no. I don't see it getting any better. I feel like the harem part's gonna become increasingly more of a problem, and I have no interest in that.
Cool, I agree.
Yeah. It's amazing that anyone ever like there's so many things wrong, and it feels like at least something would be good, but it really just feels like the people who made this didn't care.
All right, well, it was so awesome having you on, Michael. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. If you want to learn more about our show, you can visit our website at AniMonday.moe. That's AniMonday.moe. You can send us questions or comments to podcast@AniMonday.moe. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Our username is AniMondayCast, and you can find links for that on our website.
Thanks also to Crunchyroll for all of the anime that you provide, whether it's good or bad, and for the random button which produces these wonderful and wonderfully terrible results. You can follow along with us each week. We'll have a link to the current title on our website and social media, and you can watch what we're watching. Thanks also to C2A for providing the intro and outro music. Those are from the Senpai EPs, which you can find on his Bandcamp and other major streaming services. I'll also include links in the show notes and on our website.
Are you ready to roll?
Michael gets to be here for the roll.
Oh, I'm excited. Every time you guys roll something, I'm always like, wow, what'd they do to Crunchyroll? What? He must have done something real bad, like plainly unacceptable behavior. What could it be?
All right, random button in 3, 2, 1. The anime for this week is Token Ranbu.
Oh, I think I might know what that is.
Dash
This is what I'm
Hanamura.
thinking of.
Hanamaru.
The first episode is called January. Don't get cocky.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
the show I thought it was. I mean, this is an improvement over Master of Ragnarok and Blesser
Well,
of
that's good.
Einherjar. However
We
you
can
pronounce
only
that.
go up.
I mean, you think that, but I told you about some stuff that is like not worse in the execution sense, but worse in the sense that it's about something unacceptable. Like,
Sure.
but yeah, this is a real. This is one of those shows that's weird, but then pretends like nothing bizarre is happening.
I could get into that.
Yeah. Maybe it'll be okay.
Yeah, it'll be great. You'll love it. It's I actually haven't watched this because it's not for me.
Oh boy. All right.
All right, I think that'll do it for us this week. Thanks again to Michael, and thank you all for listening.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
All right, bye.
I'll try to keep the swearing to a minimum so that if other people watch this, they won't be like, "Wow,
This took a turn.
yeah." They're like, "Man, everyone was so mild," and then they had a guest on, and he's just horrible. Says unacceptable things constantly.